all, and welcome to Stingray Tom's Florida. Today I'm taking a look at something I mentioned in this recent video. I fell in love with the artwork on the General Dynamics playing card deck created in 1964. One of the packs was placed in the time capsule at the memorial to the Mercury 7 astronauts. Known as the space cards, I don't see much available information about them, so I've put together what I've learned. At first glance, the deck is an anomaly in that a huge defense and space contractor produced an artistic item that's completely different from their products of rockets and jet planes. In a moment, you'll see that the cards are not like the artwork the General Dynamics artists typically produce, such as in these advertisements. The wife of one of the artists, Dan Drnach, described the company's art department. It turns out that they had a very forward-looking art director, and he really appreciated people who could paint and draw. There was a lot of freedom in their art department. It wasn't like working for an individual client. Whatever the artists decided to do was what they lived. They did whatever they needed to do to move their ideas and program along. It was a great place for a young designer. Artists will create works outside of their normal job, and these cards were a fascinating special project. In an issue of General Dynamics News, an employee newspaper dating from January 1965, there's a short article titled "Astro's Art Section Earns Merit Award." It says that in an annual exhibition that the astronautics art section was honored with a special award. In the exhibition of Advertising and Editorial Art in the West, the Art Directors Club of Los Angeles bestowed on them the Award of Distinctive Merit. The space cards, it states, were developed by the art section for use in a management display and presentation, and were put on display at the California Museum of Science and Industry in Los Angeles. Although the cards were an official project, the artists had free rein to create the drawings. There are 54 cards in the deck, including 2 jokers. Each one is its own work of art. An accompanying card contains this quote: "These space cards tell a story, the story of America's man in space programs. The hearts deal with the human element, the clubs portray the sciences, the spades show products, and the diamonds depict modern aerospace management, without which the other 3 elements could not be successful." The deck was printed with either blue or red backs, probably because of the popularity of canasta at the time, a game that uses 2 decks. The cards were printed by National Periodical Publications, which was a comic book publisher. You may know them better by the name they took in 1977, DC Comics. The project's art director was Bert Brockett. From Connecticut, he got his education at the Worcester, Massachusetts Art Museum. He spent 35 years as an award-winning graphic artist at General Dynamics and a member of the San Diego Art Directors Club. The designer was Don Wright. He was also one of the artists and would go on to be a successful graphic designer. In 1965, he and a friend opened a graphic design studio, Suzuki and Wright. One of their major projects was creating the magazine Psychology Today. Along with Wright, there were a total of 7 artists. Masami Daijogo, better known as Sam, was a Japanese-American painter who moved to San Diego and began working for General Dynamics. As his wife recalled, he got to draw rocket ships and all kinds of things that traditionally little boys liked to draw. He'd go on to paint album covers as well. Philip Kirkland graduated from the Chouinard Art School in Los Angeles. In San Diego, he displayed his work in several galleries. Then in the 70s, he created dozens of fantastic illustrations for textbooks, science magazines, and sci-fi novels. He also painted covers for Psychology Today. Bill Noonan graduated from the Art Center College of Design. His articles featured calligraphy, illustrations, and photography. He worked for the San Diego Daily Journal and painted for such entities as Psychology Today and General Dynamics. He'd go on to be the longtime art director of the San Diego Zoo. John Sentovic was from South Dakota. He served in World War II and worked for the San Diego Union Tribune before joining General Dynamics. He spent his career there creating hundreds of artworks about rockets, space stations, planets, and more. Jack Davis and John Isley were the team's other artists, but sadly I haven't found any real information on either of them. In this video, I'm going to run through the deck listing each subject. I'm not really sure of a few, and those have green shaded titles. Feel free to comment about your ideas and let me know which are your favorites. Oh, and I thought it'd be interesting if I did the narration as if I'm on a NASA frequency from the 60s. And so, on to the cards.
Pitch 212, yaw 37. Pitch 212, yaw 37. That's a firm flight.
Eagle Houston, if you'd like to try high gain, pitch 212, yaw 37, over.
Roger, I think I've got you on high gain now.
Roger.
Pioneer 4 was an uncrewed spacecraft launched in 1959 on a lunar flyby trajectory, making it the first U.S. probe to escape from Earth's gravity. Hot air balloons were the first human-carrying aircraft and were first flown in Paris, France in 1783. A biplane is an airplane with two wings for better lift and was the first type of airplane to fly. The Atlas was the first U.S. intercontinental ballistic missile in service between 1959 and 1964. It was built for the Air Force by Canaveral, a part of General Dynamics. The Canaveral F-106 was the primary interceptor aircraft of the Air Force through the Cold War. It was designed specifically for a defensive interception role against attacking aircraft. NASA used the F-106 for tests until 1998. Project Mercury was the first astronaut team, and most people think that the flight names were a nod to the 7 pilots, but it didn't start that way. Alan Shepard added 7 to the patriotic freedom because his was the 7th capsule off the production line. The rest kept the 7 because the public liked it. Apollo 11 was the flight that landed the first humans on the moon. Commander Neil Armstrong and pilot Buzz Aldrin spent more than 2.5 hours walking on the moon, naming their landing site Tranquility Base. Pilot Michael Collins orbited above. Possibly a bird-like airplane, maybe like the Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird reconnaissance aircraft. First flying in 1964, it had a crew of 2 and is the fastest non-rocket aircraft. Its top speed is Mach 3.3, but it's thought to be able to exceed Mach 3.5. Space stations have long been a concept for working in space. Orbital Reef is a planned low-Earth orbit space station designed by Blue Origin and Sierra Space for commercial and tourism use. It's being designed to support 10 people and might be operational by 2027. Vanguard 1 was NASA's second successful satellite and was used for determining atmospheric densities. The television infrared observation satellite, known as TIROS, was the first full-scale weather satellite. Nimbus satellites were used for weather research and atmospheric data as well. Possibly an explorer spacecraft like Viking. Carl Sagan was an astrophysicist, planetary scientist, and astrobiologist. For many years he was a NASA advisor, briefing astronauts before their moon flights. He is posing with a model of the Viking landers, which reached Mars in 1976. Before the 18th century, the only way humans might fly is by supernatural means. I don't know about cats. Robert Goddard was an engineer, physicist, and inventor who flew the world's first liquid-fueled rocket in 1926 using gasoline and liquid oxygen. In the 50s, he'd be recognized as one of the fathers of rocketry. NASA's Goddard Space Center is named for him. Vitruvian Man is a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci from 1490. Inspired by the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, the drawing depicts a man in two positions inscribed in a circle and square. The image was also used for a Skylab mission. Buck Rogers is a sci-fi hero in a comic strip created by Philip Nolan, first appearing in newspapers in 1929. The character is credited with bringing space exploration into popular media. In the 1979 Buck Rogers TV show, Buck is a NASA pilot. High-G training is done by pilots and astronauts who are subject to high levels of acceleration known as G-force. It's designed to prevent loss of consciousness when the action of G-force pushes the blood away from the brain. A helmet is a key component of a spacesuit, and it's designed to protect the astronaut from the vacuum of space while allowing great visibility. A flexible spacesuit has always been a goal since astronauts need to be able to do complicated work in them. Davin Newman is the designer of the biosuit, which is flexible and skin-tight. It was designed with NASA and MIT as an alternative to traditional suits. Because of NASA's concerns for the safety of its astronauts, it developed biomedical equipment capable of transmitting from space. As they blasted off, they wore electrodes to measure heart rate, a thermistor that measured breathing, and a rectal probe that captured temperature. On the International Space Station, astronaut Kate Rubins wore a suit painted by children with cancer as part of the spacesuit project, which raises awareness for childhood cancer. Early space food was composed of cubes, freeze-dried powders, and liquids in aluminum tubes. John Glenn was the first to eat directly from a tube, applesauce. Tubes were discontinued since astronauts couldn't smell or see the food, plus there was limits on the types of food available. Today, astronauts sleep in crew cabins that are about the size of a shower stall, in a sleeping bag strapped to the wall. The cabins need to be well ventilated, otherwise astronauts can end up gasping for air because a bubble of their own carbon dioxide forms around their heads. While this drawing implies that a capsule is roomy, in the early NASA missions, astronauts were almost plugged into the capsule like the rest of the equipment. For example, here's Alan Shepard's accommodations in America's first crewed flight. Ed White and Jim McDivitt flew on Gemini 4. White became the first American to make a spacewalk. He found the experience so exhilarating that he was reluctant to end it and was ordered back in. There was an issue with the hatch that made it hard to close. McDivitt was eventually able to get it locked. Amelia Earhart was an aviation pioneer. She set many records, including the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic. She and navigator Fred Noonan disappeared over the central Pacific Ocean. The Mercury 7 were NASA's first astronauts. All but one of them flew a Mercury mission. Deke Slayton was diagnosed with an erratic heart rhythm and was grounded until 1970. In 1975, he'd fly on an Apollo-Soyuz flight 16 years after becoming an astronaut. A list of the fields of science relevant to space travel. The functional MRI gives detailed pictures of brain activity and is used to determine precisely which areas are handling critical functions like thought, speech, vision, movement, and sensation. Leonardo da Vinci was an Italian painter, engineer, scientist, theorist, scientific illustrator, and architect. He studied and designed dozens of machines and devices that were collected in more than 5,000 pages of his notebooks. Engineers and technicians who design and build spacecraft are vital to NASA. Here, they're fitting a lunar rover to Apollo 15. NASA's 3 rovers traveled 56 miles or 90 kilometers on the moon and reached a top speed of 11 miles per hour or 18 kilometers. Human centrifuges are exceptionally large centrifuges that test the reactions and tolerance of pilots and astronauts to acceleration. The first centrifuges used for human research were used by Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of Charles Darwin. A parabolic antenna has a curved surface with the cross-sectional shape of a parabola to collect radio waves. There's a series of such antennas around the world that NASA uses for communication. One of the objectives of Project Gemini was to develop orbital maneuvers necessary to achieve rendezvous and docking with other spacecraft. By the Apollo missions, meeting another craft became common, as in this Apollo 11 lunar ascent module. Mainframe computers are used for applications like data processing. They use sets of punched cards or magnetic tape to transfer data and programs. The cards are pieces of cardstock that hold data represented by holes in predefined positions.
Copy.
A translunar injection, or TLI, is a propulsive maneuver used to set a spacecraft on a trajectory that causes it to reach the moon. For the Apollo missions, TLI was performed by the restartable J2 engine in the S-4B third stage of the Saturn V rocket. An astronaut in a spacesuit working on a capsule, like astronauts Richard Linehan and John Grunsfeld did in 2002 as they installed upgrades to the Hubble Space Telescope. There's many prototype spacecraft, including the Carillion Engineering Corporation's YT-1300F light freighter designed by Joe Johnson. At 114 feet or 35 meters long, it's only one-third as long as the Saturn V launch vehicle. Ham was one of 2 space chimps. He and his compatriot Enos went where no American human had gone. In 1961, Ham flew a suborbital flight which set the stage for Alan Shepard's. Ham wasn't named until after his mission. NASA thought it'd be bad if a named chimp was lost. This iconic American painting is by James Whistler. The subject is Whistler's mother, Anna. The painting also has Whistler's etching of the Thames River, which was replaced by the Wright brothers' plane. By the way, Anna was the niece of Zephaniah Kingsley, a Florida plantation owner and slaver. The sun is a ball of plasma that primarily radiates as visible light, ultraviolet, and infrared radiation, but also produces other wavelengths along the electromagnetic spectrum. A flowchart is a type of diagram that represents a workflow or process. Two old communication methods, but while they're archaic today, similar phones and fountain pens could be found in mission control for many years. This appears to be a thinking person, someone lost in deep thought. That reminded me of the Vulcan mind meld technique for sharing experiences and knowledge with another individual, essentially a form of telepathy.
Copy.
This is likely a representation of the people who ultimately made the life or death decisions at NASA, such as this group of Project Apollo managers.
Roger.
Exploded diagrams are drawings of an object showing the relationship of the parts. The S-4B was the third engine stage on the Saturn V. For lunar missions, it was fired twice. First for Earth orbit insertion after the second stage cutoff, and then for translunar injection. A go, no-go test is a 2-step verification process that uses 2 boundary conditions or a binary classification. The test is passed only when the go condition is met and the no-go condition has failed. And yes, there are go, no-go tools. Communication between astronaut and flight controller at Mission Control. Astronaut Sally Ride and engineer Poppy Northcutt are wearing such devices. Ride was the first female American and the first known LGBT person to fly in space. Northcutt was the first female engineer in NASA's Mission Control. Rorschach is a psychological test in which perceptions of ink blots are analyzed. Use it to examine personality and emotional function. It was invented by Swiss psychologist Hermann Rorschach in 1921. Astronaut candidates took the test as part of their evaluation. PERT was developed to simplify the planning and scheduling of large and complex projects. It's a statistical tool used to analyze and represent the tasks involved in completing a project. It was first developed by the Navy in 1958. A board table is a large table typically used in board meetings. An Air Force general like Marcelite Harris, who was a commander of the Air Force Academy and the first female director of maintenance. She retired as the highest-ranking female Air Force officer and after was NASA's Florida director for the Space Shuttle program. The Statue of Liberty was a gift from the people of France and was designed by Frederick Bartholdi with a metal framework built by Gustave Eiffel. The statue was dedicated in 1886. As the saying goes, money makes the world go round. This dollar bill features Uncle Sam, a character who is a personification of the U.S. government and was created around 1810. This shows a lunar orbit like the 6 successful Apollo moon landing missions. This is the Apollo 17 command and service module orbiting the moon. This card has the traditional planetary symbols, many of them originating in ancient Greece. Superman appears in comic books published by DC Comics and was created by writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster. He first appeared in 1938.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
This video is part of my goal to make primary historical documents available to the general public. It's important that unique items like this deck of cards, with such evocative artwork, can be seen and their meanings explored. Thank you for watching another of my videos. If you learned something, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to learn more about Florida's tourism history. Stingray Tom's Florida, traveling through time around the Sunshine State.